Hello, and welcome to the Sound of Economics podcast from Bruegel, the Brussels-based economic policy think tank. I'm Sarah Cool-Fergus, Bruegel's interim press officer, and joining me for today's episode is Bruegel Associate Fellow Silvia Merler.
Hi.
Marcello Minena, PhD lecturer at the London Graduate School and head of quants at Consop, and Lorenzo Codogno, LSE visiting professor. Now today, after more than 2 months since the Italian elections, we'll be discussing Italy's outlook as it moves forward, a topic which you have all discussed about extensively. So firstly, Silvia, can you elaborate on the new government's policy priorities? And from an economic point of view, what message is the government sending about the financial market and investors?
Well, I think this is what is mostly worrying investors right now, because there's a bit of uncertainty as to what the economic program is going to be, particularly about the fiscal impact that this is going to have on Italian public finances. And the current government contract that the two parties have agreed upon leaves many things a bit unclear, particularly about the financing of the measures that are going to be implemented and the extent that this is going to impact the fiscal deficit.
And to follow up on what you just said, why is the European Union still worried about Italy's new government? Perhaps, Minana, you could respond.
You know, there is a discontinuity eventually, and so anytime there is a discontinuity, it's clear that the market tries to give a probability to new events, and what happens in the market is just the discounted expected value of future events with a certain probability. In this moment, there are some things that are under discussion within the governments, also within the governments and the European Commission, related to the topics of the immigrants, related to the topics of the fiscal discipline. Actually, the Minister of Finance has been very clear that he will respect the rules and he will take care about what are the requests that come from Brussels and from the indication that also arrives in terms of, possibility and space of space in the fiscal policy that the country will have. In any case, the market is quoting this uncertainty. We have several indicators about redenomination risk, the quantum basis, the ISDA basis, the CAC basis that are growing. It's not only a question of the nominal spread actually, but I believe that, and I hope also that soon the debate will be better focused on these critical topics that I mentioned before, and so the situation will be, I hope, more clear, and at a certain point in time we finish in a safe and sound situation. Even if in terms of indicators, data, this moment actually is not much stable, in my opinion, and resilient with respect to the period where we have the peak of the crisis at the end of 2011 and the beginning of 2012, because there are several situations that are not fixed. The eurozone is still moving towards a policy in which risk reduction is a must, but unfortunately the kind of policy that has been introduced moves also towards risk segregation, and if you have one currency area, sooner or later you have to face the problem of the risk sharing.
And I want to talk also a bit about economic growth today. So if we take a long-term view, and maybe Lorenzo, you can talk about this as well. Economic growth seems to be a key problem that the Italian government faces. So is the current or the current government's program consistent with addressing this long-standing issue?
Well, actually the other way around. I think it's totally inconsistent in a sense that and the plans are to roll back some of the reforms introduced in the past, which clearly brings about some risks. The economic performance has been pretty dismal over the past 20-25 years, I would say. So it's certainly not a new problem. And the previous government has tried to kind of introduce some reforms with mixed success, in my view. There is a lot that needs to be done, but the start of the new program, the new government has been a bit disappointing because it has introduced some measures to roll back some of the features of the labor market reform. In my view, if the measures proposed so far, because they still have to pass Parliament, will go through as they are, probably the damage will be minor, so not a huge one, which will be good. But there are other issues that remains open. The current government wants to also cancel the reform of the pension system in Italy, which that would be hugely problematic in my view, because clearly given low productivity, low potential growth, and the demographic challenge, long-term sustainability relies on the pension reform. If you roll back the pension reform, clearly that would trigger some negative reaction by rating agencies and probably financial markets. So that is one key issue that needs to be monitored between now and September. And then in September will come the acid test of the budget. And in terms of the budget, we will see whether the government will be able to combine the electoral promises, which have been, as everybody knows, huge from a monetary perspective, which probably I would say will be introduced very gradually, and also the already challenging situation of public finance, given that Italy comes from a long period of below par stagnation, below par economic performance, and is gradually recovering from a very deep recession. And again, public accounts are still in a difficult shape.
So we've talked a lot about kind of the economic situation in Italy. I was hoping now we could switch focus more on the political one as well. So I was wondering what your thoughts would be on Italy's euroscepticism. Particularly, what do you think explains this tension in between Italy and the European institutions, and how realistic is this Italy exit that we hear a lot about in the media? Maybe you could speak to that a little bit more.
Sure. I think as for the root of euroscepticism, there's a lot that links to your previous question. So the fact that growth has been really not delivering much for a very long period of time means that per capita income in Italy is today about the same level it was in 1999. So standard of living has not improved for generations, basically, and this is obviously a problem. At the same time, unemployment remains high, particularly youth unemployment is still very high, and it tends to be very long-term. So there's an entire generation that is sort of becoming hopeless, in a sense. And from a political standpoint, it's been very easy to blame this on the adoption of the single currency, which has become a very politicized issue in the political arena in Italy. So as for the actual perspective of Italexit, I don't think this is an objective of the current government as it stands right now, at least on paper. But I think both markets and observers and new institutions are going to keep worrying about the possibility that even accidentally this might happen due to particularly due to the budget process. So if we were to observe a budget that is very much deficit-based, this could trigger an economic crisis and financial crisis on the markets that might eventually lead to the same conclusion, even if not in a planned or intended way.
And you, Mr. Minena, what's your view on this?
Actually, I believe that the Italexit arrived at this point is not an option. For several reasons. A couple of years ago, I wrote a research with the research department of Mediobanca, where I explained also why by offering some figures on that. And by focusing on one point that one may be of the point that you can estimate in terms of the pros and cons of an Italexit, and they explain quite clear by analyzing the problem and the opportunities of the usage of the Lex Monete on the public debt, that arrived at this stage, it was 2 years ago, so the situation now is worse, there was not an advantage of applying the lex monete to the public debt, because as you know, it is clear that an Italexit would represent, first thing, the possibility for the country to use the lex monete to convert asset and liabilities from euro in a different currency that, according to the present value of the CDS and loss given default, could obviously should be devaluated, at least at the beginning, with respect to the previous euro. And so I explained that this option actually was no longer present, because since more than half of the public debt is now assisted by collective action clauses that actually reduce the possibility and the capability of redenominating the debt in a different currency, it is clear that the advantage is no longer present as maybe it was in year 2010 or year 2009 or also 2011, so before that the ESM agreement inserted this clause in the European regulation. So the point is also difficult to face. So this aspect was an aspect where you can make some quantification, without incredible conjectures. Since I am a mathematician, I don't like too many conjectures. The point, in my opinion, is also difficult to manage, because we have also to remember that we have plenty of information technology infrastructure that should have to be implemented if a country want to leave the eurozone, because let's just speak about the target 2 payment system, or the way in which the banking system is, interconnected with the other institution, not only within Europe but also outside Europe. So there are plenty of things that has to be implemented, realized, that would require 2 years of working, 3 years of working, who knows? So it's not only a question, to print notes. It's not that the case. As well, I believe that we should work on the Eurozone architecture in order to complete the European Union, because in this moment we have this incomplete architecture, as I give this name in a book on the Eurozone architecture that I published a couple of years ago, because it is clear that you cannot have monetary union without banking union, without fiscal union, without a federal budget, without trying to push the euro currency closer to the US dollar currency. And it is a complex process, because it will require years in order to arrive there. And so, for this reason, I believe that we have to concentrate our efforts in order to find some ways not to, confirm the present status quo that actually does not work, and to move towards this direction by finding some, solution, and by using the present pillars of the architecture. For example, the ESM or the ECB, or all these subjects, the European authority that we have created, the way in which the rules are written, the European directive. Just to tell you something, when the euro was born in 1999, I remember the working on the risk directives, the directives on banks, on insurance companies and mutual funds. And one critical aspect in this directive was to give no risk to govies, whatever member country was. Why this? Because we have to give to financial markets the idea that the European Union was a normal currency area where the risk was substantially shared. And it worked. It worked. In less than 3 years, financial institutions plays with convergence trade. And instead of having 18 interest rate term structures, we arrived to have just one, the German one. I called in my book the Germanization of the interest rate term structure. And at the same time, obviously, core countries get an advantage for having peripheral countries inside, what I call the Italianization of the exchange rate, that obviously allow Germany in its mercantilistic, economic policy. So we have to move on some, general and basis principles, and try to re-implement the architecture. We have a great opportunity in this year and in the next year, since the agreement, the fiscal compact, is expired last year, and so we have to work on this. In fact, they are working. I mean, the Euro bureaucracy is working on this, and also we have the ESM treaty that is under discussion. And then we have the banking union, that is an important stuff that is, again, discussion. We have the rules on the MREL, TILAC. I mean, there is plenty of financial stuff that has to be designed. In my opinion, these stuff and these rules are the ones that can move to a more resilient eurozone, if we take the right decision. That has to have, in my opinion, as a polar star, the risk sharing, not the debt sharing. And otherwise, it is clear that we will increase the endogenous risk of the eurozone architecture. And obviously, if you increase the risk, it's just as you press a glass. If you increase the pressure, you don't see the glass deformation because it's glass. But sooner or later, the glass would break up.
And I'd be interested into hearing Lorenzo's comments on these two issues. And I guess as a final question, I'm wondering how the Italian government might also move forward, as Minena proposed. Do you agree with his statements? How can Italy move forward to work with the EU institutions a bit more?
Well, clearly, the relationship with Europe is a difficult one right now. We have seen that already in the migration issue and the European Council at the end of June. So that doesn't really bode well for any other kind of negotiations, but we will see how the situation will evolve, because it's not just an Italian problem, it's a European problem. And so I think clearly the European summit was a total disappointment in terms of steps towards further integration and also steps towards a kind of open discussion on the future. So that's the point. Going back to the previous topic, I think the big question mark in financial markets right now is what would be the reaction function of the government if faced with a severe crisis. And the crisis can actually come for policy mistakes. It could also come for a change in the external assumptions and external variables, such as global trade or the economic growth in the eurozone. So I think there are a number of things that could go wrong, and also from the external scenario. So if for different reasons Italy has to face another problem similar to 2011, I'm not sure that the response this time would be a Monti government. It would probably be something different. And my guess is that at that point there might be a risk that the new government decides unilaterally to leave the euro. I think this is a very small probability, but can no longer be ruled out, because if we take at face value all the statements by both League members and also Five-Star Movement members, clearly they are deeply Eurosceptic, and some of them are explicitly preparing for Plan Bs. So I think this is the kind of backdrop, if you wish. But leaving aside the small but not negligible probability of Euro exit, I think there is a more real issue, which is related what will be the fiscal trajectory over the near term, because I think the risk that the Italian government enters a kind of confrontation with the rest of the EU over the near term on fiscal targets and on overall economic policy is relatively high, and I called it a kind of Syriza-like trajectory. So basically making policy mistakes in the near term and then correcting these policy mistakes over time, but depending whether this is corrected in the near term or it takes long to get to the point of correction, so to speak, and then it might actually change dramatically the economic situation and the fiscal stability situation. So I think that needs to be watched very carefully. My baseline scenario remains, however, that the government, faced with the situation, eventually understands that it would be much better off to kind of introduce policies in a very gradual fashion and maintaining fiscal sustainability and maintaining fiscal discipline, which seems what Minister Tria is suggesting right now. But again, it will be extremely difficult to combine all the electoral promises with fiscal discipline and trying to comply also with the fiscal rules in Europe. So the situation is indeed very difficult. Again, cross fingers that we don't see a total blow-up of the pension reform between now and September, and then September time will be key in order to assess the outlook for public finances in Italy.
Well, I just want to thank you all for coming today for this Sound of Economics podcast. I hope you can join us again once more. If you ever come by in Brussels, that'd be fantastic. If you want to find out more of Bruegel's blog posts and publications, you can head over to our website at www.bruegel.org, and I'll hope you will join us again in the near future. Thank you very much.